Hello everybody and welcome to my YouTube channel. I of course am just another heavy metal maniac, and today I am very excited to bring you all another discography ranking. My first discography ranking of 2025, and I have chosen to rank all of the albums from a pretty legendary death metal band, Incantation. Incantation, one of the staples in just, that American old school death metal sound. One of the most influential death metal bands, honestly. Like, the amount of, newer bands that pop up that sound like Incantation, honestly, kind of boggles the mind a little bit. These guys really kind of helped pioneer just that style of cavernous, gross, filthy, just evil-sounding death metal, and yeah, without doubt, one of my favorite death metal bands. I just really think these guys are absolutely awesome, and we're going to be ranking all 12 of their studio albums, only the studio albums. We're not counting EPs, demos, compilations, any of that stuff. We're only counting the studio album, so without further ado, enough of my ramblings, let's just get into this discography ranking. Of course, we are starting at the bottom of the pile, so my number 12 choice is Decimate Christian, released in 2004. So, this was their first album to feature John McEntee on the vocals. Obviously, John McEntee was the founding member and the lone consistent member within Incantation. This was his first album on the vocals. And this album is... I don't think this album is bad. Incantation do not have a bad album. For the most part, they are a just grossly consistent band. They really have a sound that they kind of just stick to, and for the most part, it pays off for them pretty well. But this album, for me, the reason it lands at number 12 is just because this is the album that, for me, had the fewest, standout moments and the fewest kind of standout tracks. There are good songs on here, like Oath of Armageddon is a pretty good song, Thorns of Everlasting Persecution. Not only is that a great song title, that's also just a great song. That's the thing with Incantation, they have some of the best song titles, ever. The last track, Feeble Existence, I thought was also pretty good. So there are some good songs, but for the most part, this album it's kind of just there. Again, it's not bad, it's decent for what it is, but they just have way better albums than this. Yes, that's really why it's at number 12. Has some good moments, but not enough for it to go any higher, so Decimate Christendom lands at the bottom of the pile at number 12. Taking the number 11 spot, it is Blasphemous, released in 2002. So this was their second and final album to feature Mike Sayez on the vocals. After this, John McEntee would take over on Decimate Christendom. So this album is not last place, but it is second to last, namely for two kind of big reasons. There's really two big things that kind of drag this album down for me. The first of all is the production, namely the drums. The drums on this album sound really bad, frankly. They're super quiet, and they kind of get buried by the guitars and the bass, which are all kind of just mud on here. So yeah, the production of this album is pretty rough. And there's also a pointless 20-minute long, ambient outro at the end of this album. I don't know why. It's just 20 minutes of, a random spooky noise being looped. And I know that was a thing a lot of bands did in the early 2000s, but it's why? Why did anyone think this was a good idea? I don't get why they chose to do that. But, the pointless outro and the bad production really are the kind of things that drag this album down. But there are some absolutely banging songs on here, Rotting With Your Christ is a really good song. His Weak Hand is really good. Uprising Heresy, I really dig that song. So really good songs, but again, just the poor production and the stupid ambient outro that's 20 minutes too long. Should have been 0 minutes. I don't think it should have been there in the first place at all. But making it 20 minutes is just why? So yeah, Blasphemy, and again, the album cover is also pretty crappy too, to be honest. But yeah, Blasphemy, not dead last, but it is second to last for all the reasons that I mentioned. So, coming in at number 10, it is the Infernal Storm, released at the turn of the century in 2000. So this was their first album with Mike Sayez on vocals, which he does deliver a pretty solid performance, but it honestly is probably he probably is the least remarkable vocalist this band had, studio album wise, because I know they had a couple. I believe Will Raumer from Mortician was a live vocalist for a while. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was. The Infernal Storm, the production of this album is not great. It's better than Blasphemy, but it's still not great. It's just kind of that early 2000s muddy kind of death metal sound that was kind of frankly very prevalent, and it doesn't sound great, but it doesn't sound terrible either. But really, Infernal Storm kind of suffers from the same problem that Decimate Christian had, where it's a perfectly decent album, but it just doesn't have as many standout moments as some other albums. There are still some good songs on here, like the opening track, Anoint the Chosen. I enjoy that song. Heaven Departed is a really good song too. Nocturnal Kingdom of Demonic Enlightenment, I enjoy that song quite a lot. But yeah, Infernal Storm. This album also suffers from being the follow-up to one of my favorite Incantation albums, so it does kind of suffer from, I guess, high expectations, really. But yeah, Infernal Storm, again, decent for what it is, but they just have way better albums than this, in my opinion. Alright, and kicking off these single digits is Primordial Domination, released in 2006, coming in at number 9. Primordial Domination, this is a pretty solid album. I think it is kind of a slight improvement over Decimate Christian, where the songs stand out a little bit more, and I think overall the production of this album is also kind of a bit meatier sounding, and it just sounds better overall. Pretty killer songs on here, like Hail to Babylon, I enjoy that song. Dissolute Rule, Begin Apocalypse, Led to Desolation is pretty solid too. There's maybe a little bit kind of more groove on this album in some spots, like almost kind of, like the beginning of this album almost kind of felt a bit obituary-ish, kind of weirdly. But yeah, Primordial Domination, I think it's better than all the albums I mentioned previously. But again, it's just kind of like a thing where this band is, for the most part, pretty consistent, and at a certain point, I know I've said this a lot in discography rankings when I'm ranking bands like this, but at a certain point, it just kind of becomes almost randomly assigning numbers to albums at a certain point. But yeah, Primordial Domination, it's a solid album, but again, they just have better albums, so for me, it lands at number 9. Taking the number 8 spot on my list, it is Unholy Deification, released in 2023. This might be a bit of a hot take, because I do see a lot of people really like this album. In fact, I've seen some people say this is one of Incantation's best albums. I kind of would disagree. I don't think it's up there with, like, albums that are like, up in my top 5 or anything. I think it's a good album. It's just kind of, I don't know really, like, it's sort of just kind of, like, I get what they were trying to go for with this album. Like, it kind of feels a bit more, like, the songs all kind of flow together really well, and this album, I feel like, is definitely meant to be listened to in kind of just one sitting, rather than kind of pulling out individual tracks. But the individual tracks, while some of them are pretty good, like Offerings is good, like Chalice, Exile, this album just suffers from the same problems as some of the other ones that are slightly below it, where it just doesn't have as many standout moments. I did play this album a bit higher than some of the others because I think I like the production more. It's got a little bit more modern sounding, but I think it's still very gritty, dirty sounding as well. So I do like the production of this album more than like Primordial Domination. But yeah, overall, it's a solid album. I just don't feel I don't feel as inclined to return to it as some of the other albums that are above it, so which is why for me, it lands at number 8. Alright, number 7 is Profane Nexus, released in 2017. Yeah, kind of like the ones I stated, but kind of similar with the other albums that are below this one. It just kind of lands at number 7 just because, well, number 7 was really kind of a vacant spot in an album. An album had to be number 7, and it was this one. Not to say this album isn't good, not to say there aren't killer songs on this album, because there are. Rites of the Locust is a really good song, Messiah Nostrum, Omens to the Altar of Onyx. Some really good songs on here. It's just, it doesn't have, again, not as good as some of their other albums, but it also is definitely better with some of their other albums, which is why for me, Profane Nexus, it lands not quite at the halfway point, but fairly close to the halfway point, so it's number 7. Alright, taking the number 6 spot on my list, it is their 1994 sophomore album, The Mortal Throne of Nazarene. So this was their second and final album with vocalist Craig Hilliard, who he would later go on to depart. He would, leave this band shortly after. Say what you will about the man himself, but he is an amazing vocalist, and he delivers an absolutely killer performance on this album. But I will say, as a follow-up to their debut album, I think this album is a kind of, I don't want to say worse, but just not as good as the debut in some aspects. Like, the production, I think, on this album got thinner, honestly, and it just doesn't, that's kind of my thing with this album, really, is just the production is kind of thin, in my opinion, and it doesn't pack the same punch as some of their other albums do, but, dude, there are some absolutely amazing songs on this album, like Demonic Incarnate is a really awesome song, Emaciated Holy Figure, Essence of Blaze, I love that song, The Ibex Moon is also killer. And Abolishment of Immaculate Serenity. That song gets pretty damn doomy, and that is a great album. I know there's kind of like a thing like the Incantation fanbase because they also did release Upon the Throne of the Apocalypse, which is basically this album, but it was like, was it the first demo or like one of the original demos, and with the track listing in reverse order, and there's kind of a competition between, or well, not a competition, but it seems to be like sort of a thing in the fanbase where you either prefer the songs on Mortal Throne of Nazarene or Upon the Throne of Apocalypse. I think I might prefer the songs on Upon the Throne of Apocalypse, honestly, because the production on the demo, weirdly, I find is better than this album. Like, it's just kind of meatier, but I would say the track listing I find it a little bit odd. Like, Abolishment of Immaculate Serenity is kind of a weird opening track rather than it's much better as a closing track. So I don't know, honestly, but yeah, obviously didn't include that because that's technically not an album, but yeah, Mortal Throne of Nazarene, it lands directly at the halfway point. I do really like this album, but again, there's just other albums that I think are slightly better, but don't make no mistake, this album is pretty damn killer. So, taking the number 5 spot on my list, it is Vanquish in Vengeance, released in 2012. The longest gap between studio albums for this band, because the previous album, Primal Domination, came out in 2006, and this came out in 2012, so they took kind of a little 6-year hiatus. And I think that 6-year hiatus honestly really paid off, because this album, I think, was a big step up from some of the other albums that came before. Like, this album, they sound like inspired. They just sound, they're like, okay guys, we took a break for a while, but now we're back and we are here to just melt faces and riff our asses off. And yeah, this album is pretty damn awesome in my opinion. Some of my favorite Incantation songs are on this album. Like, Invoked Infinity is an absolutely amazing song. Transcend into Absolute Dissolution is a banger. The title track, Profound Loathing, and the closing track, the big, like, 15-minute closer, Legion of Dis. Holy fuck, that song gets doomy and heavy as hell. That song is just absolutely killer in my opinion. Yeah, Vanquish and Vengeance, this is just an awesome album in my opinion. I really dig the shit out of this album. Like I said, they sound inspired again. They sound like they're not just like, you know, kind of playing Incantation by numbers. They sound like they really are putting a lot more, you know, focus and attention into their songwriting, and it sounds absolutely awesome in my opinion. Vanquish and Vengeance, it's number 5. It's killer in my opinion. And taking the number 4 spot on my list, it is Durges of Elysium, released in 2014. I dig the shit out of this album. This album is absolutely killer in my opinion. Every single song on here I think stands out. Like, Bastion of a Plague Soul is a banger. Carrion Prophecy is a really awesome song. From a Glaciate Womb is really good. Impalement of Divinity is a banger. And the last track, again, this kind of big, heavy, doomy closer, Elysium Eternity is Nigh. Fucking amazing song. I really dig the production on this album. Like, it's just super heavy, and again, maybe a little bit more modern sounding, but I don't think it's overly clean or overly polished. It's got all the dirt and the grit and the mud that you would want out of an Incantation album. This is just an amazing album in my opinion. I dig the shit out of this album. Like, honestly, again, all these songs are super killer. I would happily go back and jam this album right away. It's not quite in the top 3, but it could be, honestly, because this album is just fucking killer. And taking the number 3 spot, it is Onward to Go Gaffa, their 1992 debut album. Holy shit, what an absolutely killer debut for this band. The production of this album is very muddy and very murky sounding, but honestly, I find it enhances the experience rather than detracting from it, so I really dig the production on this album. Obviously, this is the first album with Craig Hilliard on the vocals, and yeah, his performance is absolutely menacing. Just these giant growls that are drenched in reverb, and it just sounds absolutely filthy and menacing. And some of the best Incantation songs are on this album. Like, they really came out swinging. Like, the song Go Gaffa is amazing, Blasphemous Cremation, Rotting Spiritual Embodiment. Holy shit, that song is fucking awesome. Oh my god. Christening the Afterbirth, Profanation, Deliverance of Horrific Prophecies. Again, just some of the best song titles ever. Yeah, this debut is an absolute beast. I love this album. Like, this, again, love the production, and I just love all these songwriting tropes. Not as doomy as some of their later material, which Death Doom is definitely kind of a part of Incantation sound, although I wouldn't say they're like a full-bore Death Doom band, but Doom is definitely a part of their sound, although this is very much more focused on just being a straight-up death metal album, which I do really enjoy. But yeah, Onward to Go Gaffa, it's number 3, fucking amazing debut. And taking the number 2 spot on my list, it is Sect of Vainities, released in 2020. I am honestly kind of shocked about how good this album is. Like, especially, you know, for a band that's been around this long to release an album this good that ends up this high on my list, you just love to see it. I think this album is absolutely just incredible. Like, these guys, again, they sound inspired. They just sound like they're, you know, just going at it, and all their songwriting, everything they do well is really on display on this album. Like, you get all the faster sections, you get the more doomy sections, and you just get, you know, pretty much everything I love about Incantation is on this album. And all of these songs are absolutely killer, but some of my favorites would be Ritual and Purity, Entrails of the Hag Queen, which has a great music video, by the way, very, very gross. Black Fathom's Fire is an amazing song. Shadowblade, Masters of Tempest, and Maelstrom, great song title, but that song's fucking killer. Scribes of the Stygian, Siege Hive. I love this album. Like, this album really it kind of blows me away how good this album is from a band this late into their career, releasing an album this good. I always get kind of giddy when that happens, just because, you know, sometimes bands just mellow out as they get older, but these guys, they did not mellow out at all. Like, this album is fucking amazing. It could have been number 1, but there's one album I like slightly more than this one, but this is honestly just an incredible album. And taking the number 1 spot on my list, it is Diabolical Conquest, released in 1998. I adore this album, so much so that I don't know if you can see it because of the glare here. I actually just grab it, I proudly display my Diabolical Conquest vinyl right there on my shelf, because I fucking love this album. This was their only album to feature Daniel Corchado on the vocals. Obviously, Daniel Corchado from a handful of projects like the Cenotaph and The Chasm. Love Daniel Corchado. I think he's one of the most underrated death metal vocalists out there, and his performance on this album is fucking amazing. I think this is the best vocal performance this band ever had, honestly. But yeah, this is just a perfect death metal album in my opinion. It's got everything you want. It's got that perfect 90s production. Like, it's very, very, like, I love the production of this album. It's just perfect, honestly. And all these songs are super memorable. Every song stands out for, you know, different reasons. All great reasons. Desecration of the Heavenly Graceful is an amazing song. Disciples of Blasphemous Reprisal. That song is just absolutely vicious, and I love it. United in Repugnance. Ethereal Misery. And the closing track, which is the longest song they ever did, this Unto Infinite Twilight, just this giant, like, opus, epic song. That song is just absolutely incredible. Like, seriously, this album is one of my favorite death metal albums of all time. Like, this is seriously just I have no problem calling this a masterpiece of death metal. I have zero gripes with this album. Like, this is a perfect death metal album. Like, you get all the doomy sections, you get all the just furious, blasty death metal sections, and again, Daniel Corchado's vocals, he just delivers an absolutely menacing performance, and yeah, Diabolical Conquest, this is just a perfect album. And, well, that concludes my ranking for Incantation, one of the best death metal bands out there in my opinion, and I hope you all enjoyed this video. I hope you all enjoyed watching this video just as much as I did making it. If you made it to the end of this video, you are awesome, and I appreciate you. Do consider leaving a like if you enjoyed this video. Leave a comment down below. Tell me, do you agree with my rankings? Do you disagree? Let me know. And, well, like I said, that about does it. I'm just another heavy metal maniac. I'll see you all sometime in the future. In the meantime, all of you take care and have a great day. So long.